All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this Balanced Scorecard Institute webinar about the alphabet of strategy management group. Well, that's sort of a cutesy way of saying we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between balanced scorecard, OKRs, and KPIs. I'm David Wilsey. I'm the CEO of Balanced Scorecard Institute. I'm still working from home here in Cary, North Carolina, in the U.S., near the Balanced Scorecard Institute headquarters. As most of you know, this is a variation on the webinars we offer on a pretty regular basis as part of our promotional efforts related to our professional certification programs that we offer through our partnership with the George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. We've been teaching about balanced scorecard and KPIs and related type content for over 22 years now. We've been certifying professionals since 2006. We're now offering a certification in OKR development, which you can see there on the screen. All these current programs are currently offered in a live online format, although we are offering live classes again very soon, we hope. So in these introductory webinars, we usually go back to the basics. I understand there's over 1,000 people registered for this session, so I know there's a lot of folks in the line that they just want to develop a basic level understanding of the difference between balanced scorecard and KPIs and OKRs. Make sure they understand the strengths and weaknesses of each tool and how that can be used. Why do people implement these things? They're trying to create alignment. They're trying to help their employees with strategic focus. Trying to communicate what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to improve performance, create accountability, things like that. All right, so without further ado, let's talk a little bit about why so many organizations are developing these systems. So there's a lot of confusion out there, and I understand where it comes from, about all these acronyms in the field that they're connected to frameworks that frankly are very similar to each other. And so it can be frustrating, that there's different frameworks that are all designed to do roughly the same thing. So OKRs, balanced scorecards, and KPIs are all designed for goal setting, creating alignment, measuring progress, improving performance, creating accountability, and so forth. I always compare it to the difference between a stove, a grill, and a microwave. They're all designed to do roughly the same thing, but each tool has different strengths and weaknesses. And if you know what you're doing or in the kitchen, you know when to use which tool. There's a lot of benefits that are associated with these kinds of frameworks. And I always like to share a story that, from early in my career, before I knew how to do any of this stuff. I was working in manufacturing back in the day. I was lucky enough to work, directly with the owner of the company that, I was on the engineering side. So I clearly understood that his vision was to create a customized premium product and then sell it at a premium price. We spent a fortune customizing each product specifically for each customer, but my office, when I went back to my office, I was right around the corner from the sales office, and I could often hear the sales team in there talking on the phone. And I was always surprised to hear, them pitching low price to the customers. So this owner and the company had a vision for success, but they were clearly not communicating that to their sales team. Okay, so the primary benefit, that you're aiming for here is to establish a shared vision with your organization and to communicate that. What are we trying to accomplish? Let's make sure that everybody in the organization understands that. So we don't have that miscommunication, that breakdown between various silos in the organization. And then can we assess whether we're going to be successful or not? You've got, if you want to lose weight, you have to weigh yourself. If you want to eat healthy, you have to track it's more effective if you track what you're doing. If you're playing sports, you keep score. The reason you keep score or you track the number of miles you've run is because you want to know whether you're getting better or not. And if you're not tracking something, you're not going to have a lot of confidence in whether or not you're actually getting better or not. There's lots of benefits to this beyond that. It gives you a logic for how to delegate work. How do I spend my resources? Where do what do I do with my time? Offers context so that employees can make better decisions on their own about how to overcome obstacles. In other words, they're focused on one specific project If they understand the big picture strategy, if something goes wrong within their smaller project context, they can adapt more easily because they understand what you're ultimately aiming for. Um, Again, it's about delegation of work and resources. I can identify what resources are needed. I can budget things in a more intelligent fashion if I know what we're aiming for, what are our goals, and more and more we're learning about how employees really want to understand the why related to their work. They want to understand the purpose, how what they do relates to some larger purpose. Okay, so these are some of the benefits that you're aiming for. So how do you go about creating this kind of a system? In a big picture sense, these tools are all used to reinforce successful strategic performance management and sort of in a systematic manner. How do they work? We're talking about having a system that connects the dots, answers basic questions of what we're trying to accomplish. It helps leaders and employees answer the question, what is our mission? What is our vision for a successful future? Can I translate that into a plan? You know, what is our plan? Are we making progress in implementing that plan? How do we align all of our operational goals, all of our efforts, all of our initiatives, all of our programs with that plan? And then finally, how do teams and individuals align and prioritize and get things done and get things done that are of the highest priority? And so the idea of strategic performance management, whether you're using any of these three frameworks I was focusing on today, is the idea is to connect the dots between these various levels in your system, in your management plan. So two of these frameworks that I've mentioned work as a system, and they look like this. You know, this is an example of an organization level balanced scorecard that uses long-term KPIs and targets to manage performance. So this is one of our standard teaching examples that it's based on a generic city government, but the pieces would look roughly the same. You know, as if this were for a private company or any other nonprofit, any other type of organization. At the top of the picture, you see high level mission, vision, strategy. This is for the city, but again, it would be the same basic pieces for somebody else. They have four focus areas, what we call them strategic themes, but you might call them goals or priorities or anything like that. Each one has a result that defines what success looks like. On the left side of the screen, you see that they're communicating the story of how their strategy works. This is called a strategy map, and each one of those ovals are called objectives. They're laid out over four perspectives. That's what the rows are. So you can use this to draw a picture of how your strategy works. How can I connect the dots between the internal elements, the enablers in our strategy versus the outcomes at the top of the picture that we're ultimately trying to create. And then I can connect the dots between those objectives and the measures that we use to tell us whether we're accomplishing what we want to accomplish or not. They give you a sense of whether your strategy is working. It helps your employees focus attention on what matters the most. You know, back to my sales team story. If your measures are focused on a premium price, or maybe margins, the profit margin or something like that, your sales team would know what we're aiming for and what they should be, how they should be focusing their efforts. Measures can also help reduce the intangible uncertainty that often comes with strategy. You know, we decide we want to be thought leaders. Sounds great in the abstract, but until you define it in more concrete measures, sometimes employees don't necessarily know or understand what you're actually trying to do. Then on the right side of the screen, you see the strategic initiatives that the objective is implementing. These are designed specifically to help you improve performance and hit targets, achieve your strategic objectives. You know, they're prioritized and they're guided by strategies. It's designed to help you make sure that you're leveraging the ideas that will make the biggest improvement. Okay, so the idea is that you would use one of these frameworks to connect the dots. Okay, so if I'm an employee and I'm working on the initiative related to partner recruiting, I should understand how that connects to the objective within the map, and that in turn is driving an outcome we're ultimately trying to achieve. And then the next framework are KPIs. And I'm always a bit surprised by how many organizations struggle with what we even mean by a measure or a KPI. So by performance measure or a key performance indicator, we mean that the critical indicators of progress towards a desirable outcome. And so by performance measure or key performance indicator, we mean things that are quantifiable, something you can count, something you can trend over time, like this picture right here. You can see how I can count it on every period or every month, every quarter. I can trend it over time, and I can visually see whether we're improving our performance, moving out of the red into the yellow, into the green, or not. What I don't mean are initiatives. A lot of times people will call us and they'll show us their KPIs or their measures, and really what they're talking about are the milestones that they're going to hit with the actions that they're going to take. We're going to implement a CRM system. We're going to partner with with Microsoft, and that partnership is designed to accomplish something. And so what they're measuring are the milestones. Did we get the partnership put in place by date certain? Was it on time, on budget? Those kinds of questions. That's not what we're aiming for when we're talking about developing a KPI. We want something that you're going to count, something that you can trend over time, and hopefully it's connected to an outcome, a desired result that you're ultimately trying to achieve. The higher level purpose of that partnership. It's also helpful to understand that there are different types of measures, and some are more operational in nature, and some are more strategic in nature. And they can all be useful depending on what you're trying to accomplish and what are the contributing factors to achieving your desired outcomes. So operational measures are tied to a generic production model or the logic model that includes inputs, processes, and outputs. So for every process, we spend resources like time, money, raw materials, other inputs. So the example I always like to use is this coffee store. If I'm making coffee, my inputs are the water, the coffee, the time, things like that. And it might be very useful for me to be measuring the quality of my coffee beans, right? That might be crucial to the coffee that I'm producing. And then every process there are process related measures that you could also identify. In my coffee example, I'm talking about what do we need to do to go about producing coffee? Do I have a particular procedure that I want the baristas to be following in order to create consistently high quality coffee? And it's very possible that I'll have performance measures to make sure that everybody's following that procedure exactly the way I want to. Maybe it's about efficiency or speed of service or something along those lines. But the point is I'm focused on the process of producing the output, which is the coffee itself. And the output, there are all kinds of measures: the quantity, the timeliness, the accessories that I'm selling with the coffee. There's all kinds of things that I might be tracking as part of that output, what I'm producing. But ultimately, though, operational and project types measures are only part of the story. What I really want to know are the outcomes that I'm ultimately trying to achieve. What am I influencing? In this case, we're talking about happy coffee drinkers. We're talking about sales. Are they buying our coffee? Are we making money? Those are the kinds of outcomes that I might be aiming for with this coffee example. And the point is that you really need to have a family of performance measures in each of these categories. And actually, I'll show you a couple more categories you might consider to really understand whether you're making progress or not. Okay, so we've already talked about operational measures and strategic measures. If I want to add more measures to that family, I might think of some of the projects that I'm implementing and say, we're focusing on we're overhauling our corporate branding as an initiative, and so I might have some measures related to that. I might have some employee measures. I want to make sure that as we hire these baristas, that we're training them and that they have the skills they need to make the coffee. I might have a risk measure or two. Maybe we use a particular coffee bean that sometimes is not available, and maybe I have a risk related performance measure that's telling me that that's a problem or not. So that my point is that in this KPI world, you might have a whole family, a whole set of measures that are all telling you different elements, different aspects of your performance to know whether you're getting better or not. And to me, one of the most important parts of the story is the difference between leading and lagging, because what I really want to know is, am I doing some work that's contributing to some sort of an outcome I'm trying to achieve? And to do that, I have to connect the dots between leading indicators, which are more predictive of future success, and lagging indicators, which are indicative of past success. In other words, I can't just say, I want to lose weight. Um, and so I'm going to weigh myself every day. That's a lagging indicator. It's telling me how I've done in the past, unfortunately. And what I want, what I'm for this to really work well, I want a leading indicator that says, I'm tracking what I'm eating today. I'm counting my calories. Or maybe I'm coming at it from an exercise standpoint. I'm counting the amount of steps, or those are predictive measurements that tell me how I will do in the future when I step on the scale at the end of the year and I hope to have lost weight. The example we always use in an organizational standpoint has to do with these smoking cessation programs. This is just an example of the kind of work we might do as an organization. We hold these programs, and hopefully your employees understand that the story doesn't end when they're done with the program. They control this program, but what they're ultimately trying to influence is the lagging indicator of the percentage of population that smokes. So hopefully they're connecting the dots to that higher level picture, and even maybe connecting it to an even farther, an outcome that's even farther along the way in terms of cancer rates. If you don't understand this context, then you can get really bogged down in just making sure we're holding more programs and not worrying about how it connects to the bigger picture. All right, so the other framework I want to talk about today is OKR, or objectives and key results. Now, this is a framework that's gaining in popularity over the last decade or so. So here's how we define the OKR framework in our class. And frankly, it's so similar to the other frameworks that the definition could almost be interchangeable. So I understand why this is confusing for folks. And it's actually not a new framework at all. It's gaining in popularity, but it's actually based on the old management by objectives framework created by Peter Drucker way back in the 50s. And over the years, the MBO model has evolved. It evolved slightly into the SMART model in the 80s, and then sort of in parallel, it evolved into the OKR model. And frankly, the OKR model is not wildly different than the original MBO model, but the fact that Andy Grove at Intel was successful with it, and then John Doerr at Google the fact that they were so successful with it prompted this surge in popularity. So ever since Google was successful, there's been a couple of books. It seems like everybody in Silicon Valley has adopted this framework. And then in recent years, it's become even more popular in the non-tech world as well. We see governments using it. The Gap, GE, Walmart, I think, is using them. So this is gaining in popularity. It's very popular way of helping your employees articulate what they're trying to accomplish and get things done. One of the beauties of the OKR model is that it's very simple. There's objectives. Objectives qualitatively describe what you're trying to accomplish. And then there are key results. These are your goals, essentially. What do you, in a quantifiable sense, what do you hope to accomplish? So an example might look like this. You've got improve the customer experience, and you say your key result is that you're going to see a 5% increase in our net promoter score by the end of the quarter. Then you've got increased healthcare market share. Maybe that's my objective. Notice the objective is higher level. It's not quantifiable in a sense, but the vertical sales, 10% increase in healthcare vertical sales by the end of the quarter is what we're aiming for. And so I can create this at the individual level. It defines what I'm trying to accomplish in a big picture sense, and It demonstrates in a measurable sense, how we're going to what we're going to actually accomplish. So the idea is that all employees set and manage their OKRs, and it's all shared transparently. So your CEO might be trying to increase profits, and you can see that by the end of this quarter, this person is trying to increase 7% profits over the last quarter. They're trying to increase acquisition revenue. Maybe the chief operating officer is working on service quality. That's what they're focusing on. The VP of customer service is focusing on the customer experience, and they've got a net promoter score improvement that they're aiming for. The VP of Human Capital is focusing on knowledge and skills, and so forth. Marketing has something they're working on. The idea is that everybody in the organization has their own OKRs, and they share them transparently, and they update them over time. Now, what's the difference between an OKR and a KPI? That some people really wrestle with that, and it's again, there's a lot of overlap. OKRs can be tied to a KPI. A KPI is something that you're tracking continuously. Okay, so I create a performance measure. It's really important. It's key. It's important to something we're ultimately trying to accomplish. The example here, we're talking about monthly web visits. We're talking about newsletter sign up. The newsletter sign up rate. This is important maybe for this organization, and they're tracking them over time, and they see this dip. Okay, we were in the blue at the very beginning, and now we're down in the yellow. Our newsletter sign up is going poorly. You could just manage the organization with those KPIs. If you also use OKRs, you might say, I have decided that I'm going to tackle this problem this particular quarter. So my objective is to increase website effectiveness. So I'm going to try to move the needle on these two KPIs. I'm going to improve our team visits by X amount. I'm going to improve our newsletter signups by X amount. And I can track whether or not I'm achieving that this quarter. Okay, my progress towards achieving my key result is 18%, which means I've moved the needle. I was started here, and I was aiming for here. It's made an 18% improvement. This other one, I've made a 36% improvement over the course of the quarter. So the difference is I track KPIs continuously, and OKRs are identified to motivate action this quarter or this period. Maybe you're on a faster calendar than quarter. Quarter is pretty typical. So they're very related. They're very similar, but they're used slightly differently. That's the best way to explain it. Okay, so I can create an average score for my OKRs based on by averaging together the scores of the individual key results. Now, how do you go about implementing OKRs? Are there conventions? There's not one single authority on OKR development to the process. So if you Google OKRs, you're going to find a lot of different explanations as to how to go about it. But there are some conventions that are becoming pretty set. One is that people are talking about having committed OKRs versus aspirational. When you create your OKR, you decide, is this something that I am going to get done? I'm committing 100% to getting this done, or is it more aspirational? If I'm committing, I'm trying to improve sales. I say one of my OKRs is to go to 3 conferences, and I'm going to go to 3 conferences and try to sell my products at those conferences. I'm committing to it. I'm saying that at the end of the quarter, I will have done that. And then in an aspirational sense, I hope to increase sales by 40%, and maybe that's a stretch. That would be my more aspirational type OKR. Again, conventions are that you share these transparently. You report on them on a regular cadence. So you set up a schedule once a quarter where everybody in the organization is going to create their OKRs. By the end of the quarter, we're going to assign scores. We're going to talk about whether we accomplished what we want to accomplish. The OKR world frowns on the idea of cascading in a formal sense. They don't cascade, and they don't spend that time in it with top-down direction. That's not seen as a positive. They believe that the people who do this all the time think that you should be aligning in a bi-directional manner all always. They're at Google, they feel like they're just as likely to have an individual engineer come up with a new product that's going to, launch the company forward as the CEO is going to come up with that idea. So they want that bi-directional alignment happening over time. Then and one big difference is that you're resetting these OKRs every period. Whether, if you do this on a quarterly basis, it means that at the beginning of every quarter, every individual employee will rethink what they're doing. That gives them and enables them to be a little bit more agile. They believe that in the OKR world, we believe that it's about this idea of cascading actually is sort of a weakness in the balanced scorecard and KPI world. So by cascading, what I mean is this idea that you're going to translate strategy down throughout the organization and create alignment in a top-down sense. Okay, so the way that works is first you make some strategic assumptions. You assess your strategy and you look at your strategic environment. You assess yourself individually, and you create a strategy. You formulate strategy. You create mission, vision. You create goals. You translate those goals into objectives, and then each objective has a set of measures that you assign to it. You map out your strategy. This can take months. In some cases, 2 to 3 months to do this at the organization level. Then you take those objectives at the organization level and you cascade them. You translate them down into each business unit or department, support units. They all create their own objectives. They create their own KPIs. Then later, all of this takes months. Later, those objectives are cascaded down to individuals, so that every employee within each department understands how the objectives that they're working on are aligned with the objectives in their department, which in turn is aligned with the objectives at the organization level. So the effectiveness here is about line of sight, understanding how you contribute. People who work in the software industry look at this and they say, wait, what if the strategic assumptions turn out to be wrong? Or what if my software industry changes, and I have to adapt on the fly? This process looks kind of slow. Okay, and so one of the reasons why they focus on OKRs is because it gets away from this slow process as they see it, and it enables them to be a little bit more agile. Okay, so the way we're defining strategic agility in this sense is the ability to detect and quickly adapt to changes in your strategic environment. Essentially, if you're in the software industry and all of a sudden Apple moves into your space and they create a new product, you have to adapt. And you can't wait a year for the strategy to be developed and implemented. Okay, so OKRs are perceived as being a little quicker because they have a shorter cycle. They don't have, develop a 5-year plan and build it out over time. We're talking about a quarter or maybe even less. Some organizations do this on a monthly basis. The emphasis is on getting things done, action, achievement. Trying new things, experimenting, rather than creating that alignment structure. So individuals can create these on the fly without having to wait for that cascading exercise to get to them. And they can be created at the organization level, and then they're shared and created in a collab. If you have any team that gets together and needs to collaborate, can create OKRs. It's good for sharing and communicating, creating a sense of transparency. And then just to finish with a quote from the man of the hour, who just, if my news flash is telling me that he just returned from space, Jeff Bezos, he was up in space about 5 hours ago. He likes to say, if you're good at course correcting, being wrong is less costly than you think, whereas being slow is going to be expensive for sure. So the idea here is that you're shifting your culture. You're not just measuring your progress. You're trying to get to the point where you're allowing your employees to experiment more, and we're not going to punish people for failure. We're going to be able to try new ideas and adapt on the fly much faster. Okay, so it's a cultural shift. We're not thinking about top down. We're thinking about everybody aligning in an autonomous sense around desired outcomes. We're not talking about long-term planning. We're talking more about experimentation, iterative hypothesis, validation. We're not talking about long feedback loops. We're talking about experiments and faster cadences is the phrase they use. Okay, so if that's all the good stuff, what are the weaknesses? OKRs I always like to say, it's not going to replace your balanced scorecard. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of challenges to the way a lot of organizations are implementing them. Um, the biggest challenge I always see is that if you're asking all of your employees to do something that requires a certain amount of skill, a certain amount of strategic thinking skills and analytical abilities, you're asking all of your employees to do that, you run the risk of creating a mess, because even your smartest employees, if they're not trained in strategic thinking, they're going to struggle with this. I've seen it over and over and over. They don't know what their objectives should be. They don't really get the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and so they end up creating long laundry lists. Some of these challenges, they don't have a shared vision at some of these organizations. They don't have objectives to align to. They end up creating a long to-do list of things that actions they're going to take. They have a long laundry list of measures that they could possibly measure. There's wild misalignments, but from department to department, because there's not enough guidance, to help employees do this well. They don't really understand cause and effect because they never have a conversation about that. They don't follow up. They don't implement consistently. So anyway, there's a lot of challenges in this free-for-all approach that a lot of organizations take to implementing OKRs. And I've found that most employees do want to align with something. So it's useful to be able to show a picture like this, a strategy map from a balanced scorecard. These are objectives too. Objectives are objectives, whichever framework you're talking about. And so if instead of just saying, okay, go create OKRs out of thin air, if you give them this picture and they say, where do you align? They'll say, oh, I see how I fit in the process efficiency story, and I can create my own OKRs around process efficiency, or I know how I can drive cycle time down. I can help my customers not have to wait so long. This part of the story can inspire the right kinds of OKRs that are consistent with the organization's strategy. All right, so let's go back to my original point about how these systems are like a stove versus a grill versus a microwave. They all are designed to do roughly the same thing, but they each have certain strengths. So what are the strengths? Balanced scorecard is strong at communicating strategy, visualizing cause and effect. If you can write a 3-page book or a 3-page article about your strategy, but showing employees a picture will be much more effective. And a strategy map visual is a much better way to communicate with your employees what you're trying to accomplish. So communications, visual, creating alignment. Performance measures or KPIs, they're ideal for tracking and improving performance in a continuous area, in an area of continuous basis. In other words, revenue, I'm always going to be counting revenue. I'm always going to be counting costs. I'm always going to be counting the customer loyalty, the net promoter score. There's going to be certain measures that you're always going to be tracking, and to have a visualization that shows how we're trending over time is useful. And so you want to have KPIs for that purpose. OKRs, on the other hand, are very useful for short-term individual goal setting and creating accountability and making sure your employees are getting something done. And make sure you understand what your employees are working on. Make sure that you have a shared understanding between supervisor and employee as to what that employee should be focusing on. Because when they share, that there's a conversation that happens that's really useful. So individual goal setting is really great in using OKRs. Frankly, you can use these systems together. We always recommend that at the organization level, strategy level, you're talking about a balanced scorecard. That they're good for long-term focus, good at communicating strategy. And then the cascading process is particularly useful for departments and units that are strategically autonomous. In other words, let's say I've got a large department and they need to have a conversation about their strategic environment and do an assessment and figure out what their strategy should be within the department. That's when it's useful to use the cascading process that's associated with balanced scorecard. But then at the individual level, if you wanted to, you could create OKRs that are aligned, to provide that short-term accountability. So we're trying to increase revenue, and at the organization level, I personally am going to be held accountable for increasing sales in the European market by 10% at the end of this quarter. So I have an OKR. It's personal, and it's aligned with something that's in the organizational strategy. So this is one approach, is to use these frameworks together. Now, there are pros and cons to using multiple frameworks. The benefits are that you can take advantage of the similarities. I keep joking about how similar they are. That actually is an enabler here. You can implement these things without confusing people, most of the time, because they do use a lot of the same terms, and they're aiming for the same things. They improve strategic thinking, goal setting. They align. They're good for improving performance. They can be handled by different departments. Maybe your strategy team is focusing on your balanced scorecard, while your HR team is focused more on the OKR. That's one way of thinking about it. Now, on the con side, there is some complexity here. Adding different frameworks, it can be confusing for people, especially if your team really struggles with measurement and just all of this is, if there's a risk of overwhelming your team, don't go down the route of using multiple frameworks. Also, if you're educated enough to understand the weaknesses of each framework, you can just use one particular framework and try to use the positives from the other. You can implement, a lot of our balanced scorecard clients are telling us they don't necessarily want to add the OKR complexity, but they do like the idea of implementing balanced scorecard and KPIs at the individual level, using the performance cadence and the commitment at tier 3 at the individual level. So that's one way to approach this. Then there are OKR clients who are, they just have long-term shared OKRs at the strategy level. And it looks an awful lot like a balanced scorecard, but they don't use those terms. They just they call them objectives at the strategy level, so they have something to align to. All right, so that is my story in terms of the formal content. If you'd like to learn more about any of these frameworks, I'd recommend you investigate one of our certification programs. Our new OKR professional certification program is next week, live online, and then we're going to hold another one later in the year. Our flagship program is our balanced scorecard professional certification. This is the program I mentioned it's available a couple of times per month around the world. We're almost always offering this. And then finally, if you want to focus primarily on the measurement component, there's a lot to learn there. So our KPI professional certification is a good choice. You can go to kpi.org and learn more and see what dates those are offered. All right, so unless so we have time now for some questions. If you could go to the Q&A portion of the Zoom menu. I see there's already a few questions that have come in. Usually at this point, there's a flood of about 300 questions, so I probably won't get to all of them, but I'll get to as many as I can in the next few minutes. There's always a couple of questions about the slides. What we do is we provide a link to the recording. We're recording this session, and we will provide that for you all. Usually it takes a day or so for them to post it and process it and all that sort of thing. There's always a lot of questions about the programs. The online courses are led by seasoned consultants, Each of our 5 programs have been broken down into 10 sessions, 6 sessions for our part 1 class, 4 for our part 2 class. There's usually, the sessions include about 60 to 90 minutes of lecture, plus about 90 minutes of hands-on exercises. We've managed to translate all of our in-person course, all those exercises that people do with the Post-it notes. We've translated that into an online session. So you'll be in breakout rooms with small groups, working with a whiteboard and so forth. A couple questions about risk. Risk, you can definitely use any of these tools, the measurement component of any of these tools to help you understand risk. Usually there's something that you've identified as a potential negative, or I guess it could be positive, a negative occurrence that could be happening. You need an indicator that lets you know whether or not the risk is increasing. Maybe something is happening, and I even showed the slide, the coffee example. The coffee beans are unavailable. That's a risk that we can monitor. So any of the tools, Carlos is asking about OKRs. You could do the same thing with OKRs. Maybe somebody is monitoring a risk using OKRs. He also asked about the timeline, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Is it possible to plan a long-term during the pandemics and uncertainty? That's a really good question. This pandemic has been a case study in why you have to be able to adapt on the fly, right? We all think that we can predict the future well enough to create 5-year, 10-year plans, but in reality, none of us knows exactly what's going to happen with this pandemic, and in 3 weeks, much less 3 years or 30 years. I see some plans, that go way out into the future. You have to make some organizations have to make long-term resource decisions, and they have to make certain bets, but all of this should be adaptable. You have to be able to adapt on the fly. Few questions about the organization size. Is this designed just for large organizations, or can any, or a particular type of organizations, government organizations and so forth? Yeah, we've worked with every type of organization. It really doesn't matter. And frankly, the size doesn't matter so much either. We've worked with huge government agencies. We've worked with Fortune 500 huge companies. And then I think the smallest was 7 employees. And frankly, if you think about it at the personal level, goal setting is valuable. I'm going by the end of the quarter, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to track that. Setting goals, just in principle, is a powerful tool. And so it doesn't really matter the size of the organization. That 7-employee organization still needed to articulate what they're trying to accomplish, create some measures, make it happen. And so any of these tools can be useful. Now, having said that, if you're 7 employees, you're not going to have this sprawling, huge, complex system that you might have if you've got 5,000 employees. But so everybody has to adapt the framework to fit the culture of your organization. Gabriel asks can we use Balanced Scorecard to develop a strategic plan, or Balanced Scorecard can only be used as a implementation tool? Yes. Let me put it this way: the 9 steps to success, the methodology that we use, is designed to develop a strategic plan from scratch. The whole system can be developed using the 9 steps. We believe very strongly that good measurements require context. And so to get to a really good scorecard in a measurement sense, you really have to have a sound strategy, which means you have to go through all the things that you have to do to create a good strategy. And so, you can apply these tools. If you already have a plan, you can use this just for implementation, just for strategy execution. But the framework is designed to help you start from scratch and build out the whole strategy. Which of these frameworks is used most by the government, OKR or Balanced Scorecard? I think at this point, OKR is still fairly new for governments. I've heard of a few government organizations using them, but I think balance and people organization governments have been using balanced scorecard for 20 years. It's very well established. Not everybody's using it, but it's very common to find balanced scorecard. I suspect that's probably changing over time. I think OKRs are becoming somewhat more popular, but OKR is still somewhat associated with uh, the tech world, somewhat associated with the private sector. So how many petrochemical engineering companies successfully used a combination? You know, not a whole lot of organizations in general, much less a specific type of company, have used all of these frameworks at the same time. Balanced scorecard and OKRs are very commonly used. It is basically the same thing, but OKRs are not quite as popular yet, yeah, incorporated with these, with the other two frameworks. We've suggested that that OKRs really needs some sort of strategic context, and so balance scorecard and KPI is a great way to provide that. A lot of questions about KPIs. What are the appropriate KPI for sales or for something else? A lot for particular contexts. What we teach is a process because it's not necessarily as effective. You can go online and Google, KPIs and find examples, but it seems like 80% of the time I do that, it doesn't really fit the exact situation that we're talking about. And so people make the mistake of thinking they can find a book or find a website that shows examples. It can be useful reference, but there's rarely going to be a perfect measurement that somebody else created. You have to understand what we teach is the process, to get your team to articulate what you're trying to accomplish, what is your strategy, and then what is a concrete result of that strategy, and then what would be some indicators that would be indicative of those results occurring. So it's a very disciplined process. It's a way of getting your employees to think this through. How do we overcome resistance? There's a lot of people who don't want to do formal strategic planning. Maybe they think that's a waste of time. Maybe they heard bad things about balance scorecard. How do you sell it to them? That's a great question. What I like to do is do a pilot program. If you can demonstrate success, that's in other words, we just tried it with this one topic. We had one client, I think, the FAA, I think, who implemented some performance measures. They saved millions of dollars by doing some formal analysis to prove that they needed to take some action. If you can demonstrate value like that, that's a great way to start. Another thing you can do is just change the words. If they don't like balance scorecard, don't call it balance scorecard. Say we're doing operational planning. Say we're doing strategy execution. Say call it something else. Uh, a lot of times people will appreciate the principles involved here, even if they don't like the lightning rod phrase. Are there software tools for OKR or balance scorecard KPIs? Obviously, some of the screenshots you saw in my presentation. With balance scorecard, we recommend Spider Strategies. Their Spider Impact tool, you can be up and running in about 15 minutes. You get your measures in there. It's awesome. It's great for creating dashboards. It's not necessarily the best tool for OKR. There are a million products out there for OKRs as well. So, I think I was showing you a screenshot from profit.co. It's as good as any. But we haven't we haven't formally endorsed any of those products. Okay, there's a lot of questions about budgeting. This all this information is good to inform that conversation. Hopefully and also the balance scorecard is good for articulating what you're trying to accomplish, which is helpful in the budgeting process. Where should we put our resources? The resources should be should be assigned in a way that reinforces our high level strategy. What are we ultimately trying to accomplish, and are we putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak? Is it too complicated? The complexity of using multiple frameworks. I sort of addressed that a bit in the slides. Yes, the question. I mean, certainly trying to use three frameworks at the same time is going to be complicated, and so you'll want to try to minimize the complexity as much as possible. Balanced scorecard and KPIs go together perfectly. There's not any issue there. But it's the only question is whether you add OKRs to that. And frankly, most of our balanced scorecard clients are saying we'd rather just adopt the method of the fast cadence and the bidirectional alignment, all those kinds of things, but still call it balanced scorecard. We're going to call them objectives and personal KPIs. That's simpler. Um, the OKR folks that are coming to us, though, they like OKRs. They want to have OKRs, but they need that larger context. And so, in that case, it might be useful to build balanced scorecard. So, similar to what's wrong with balanced? Do we really need OKRs? That's getting at that question. Can we use OKRs at tier one only? That's getting at the issue of trying to get employees to do this. It's challenging. Of course, you can do that. That's sort of like building a balanced scorecard at tier one only. You could do that. What you would be missing is that accountability piece. Can I get everybody to sort of sign your name on the dotted line and saying I'm going to do this? I mean, the companies that use OKRs swear by it. They think that it's really valuable to have employees set their own goals and make it happen. And every quarter, you find out whether you're getting done what you want to get done. And by avoiding that organization, that employee level, you're missing that part. All right. Well, I think that's about it in terms of the questions. If I didn't get yours or if I skipped over, there was a lot. There was a lot that came in. If I skipped over yours, just send me a note. Send a note reply to your the registration email. Let me know if I didn't get to it, and I'm happy to send you a note and answer your question. Otherwise, thank you for attending the session. We really appreciate everybody reaching out to us. Please contact me again if you have any questions. Thanks for attending, and otherwise, have a great day.